This podcast is brought to you by The Dental Diet, the surprising link between your teeth, real food and life-changing natural health by Dr Steven Lin. It's available now, and for more information, go to drstevenlin.com. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining us on the line today is Dr Steven Lin. Trained at University of Sydney in a background of biomedical science, Steven works with a focus on the systemic effects of oral disease in his dental practice. A TEDx speaker and passionate health communicator, he is working to merge the dental and nutritional fields with the publication of The Dental Diet, an exploration of evolutionary diet, genetics and nutritional medicine, due for release in 2018. Based on the pioneering work of Dr Weston A. Price, Dr Lin explores the link between modern industrialised food, dental disease and every other degenerative health problem known to mankind. You can follow him for dental, nutritional and lifestyle tips at drstevenlin.com or via @drstevenlin on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Welcome back to FX Medicine, Steven. How are you?
Oh, thanks, Andrew. I'm really well. How are you going?
Really good. Now, last time we podcasted, we explored some of the functional aspects of dentistry and indeed evolution. But today I want to explore something that we eat every day, we take for granted. Modern medicine will tell us that we get ample of, but indeed we're seeing issues with, and that's the fat-soluble vitamins.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of covered a big topic last time in terms of where jaw growth in our teeth and how orthodontic braces and crooked teeth aren't just, we're not just fixing misaligned dentitions. We're actually dealing with jaws that also house jaw airways. But what I've really kind of looked into is what are the bodily processes that cause our jaws to grow, and what have we removed that have stopped our jaws from growing? Because we're really in an orthodontic epidemic now, and we can nearly track it directly to what we eat.
Well, when you say what we eat, most people would think about jaw growth and they'd be thinking minerals, not fat-soluble vitamins. When we're thinking fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E and K, what's so important about them, and indeed where are the issues?
Yeah, exactly. We do have a bit of a focus on minerals, and that is the problem. But what really, if you look at what we eat and the nutrients that the human body needs, it's how we manage these minerals. And our body has these amazing systems to actually absorb, transport and place minerals, but we have to eat the right nutrients. And the fat-soluble vitamins they're the key factors in getting your body doing these things. And I think we've misunderstood this in a way. And for growing strong jaws and teeth, they're the key nutrients.
You're indeed right. We concentrate on calcium, but then we know, and it's medically accepted, that vitamin D helps with calcium placement. But indeed, there's other things that help in that, and not just calcium, but of course other minerals.
Absolutely. And the calcium issue, it really is at the core of, when we're managing bones and tooth mineralization. How your body manages calcium really shows you, whether you're getting enough of these nutrients. And when you talk about vitamin D, this is exactly the getting to the root of the problem. And we really haven't had a great understanding of vitamin D up until quite recently, and the research on vitamin D has really streamed out over the last 2 decades. But before that, our knowledge of vitamin D was really simply just based on its role in calcium, in terms of, when we are vitamin D deficient, we'll only absorb 10 to 15% of calcium from our intestines. But it goes far beyond that as well, and it actually doesn't act alone. So even testing vitamin D alone, which is important, doesn't give us a full picture on how our body's distributing calcium.
Without throwing hundreds of dollars at testing, I do remember there was somebody who used to, I think it was $400 odd worth of testing. It was a lot of money, placing doctors in a very awkward position in Australia with regards to Medicare. How do you do appropriate testing, and what testing do you recommend?
I do recommend vitamin D testing, and there are different options, and there are still options where we can get vitamin D testing under Medicare, and that's usually when it's associated with another condition, which it always is. So that's the current state we're at, and we do unfortunately have a little bit of where physicians have been placed under a bit of pressure because of this cost. So I think in Australia we really need to move towards a cost-effective measure and where we can test everyone. And there are some good companies coming out now where we can do some blood prick tests and test vitamin D, which should be coming out. And unfortunately, we don't have, some of the options that they do in the US and UK. But vitamin D testing, in my opinion, is one of the most important measures we should be keeping an eye on, because everyone is different. And if you're not getting a lot of direct sunlight, and even in the winter months, you simply you don't have enough. And when I started testing my patients, I found that nearly all were deficient and all related to their dental disease.
There are some cheap vitamin D tests around now.
Yeah, no, there certainly are. And I think we're going to find that they are more available coming out. And I do think that, there should be a role of both, self-testing, but also, alongside physician and, as you say, user paid. But also I think, I don't know if we use our vitamin D levels right. Just testing and getting a level may not be, it's not useful if we're really not understanding this fat soluble vitamin system. I think that's really, potentially at the root of this problem is that, we've got these levels and we've got tests that are costing us money, but are we really doing the right things to address that?
So when you're saying address that, you mean use the right tests?
Well, not so much tests. So, for instance, there was a study in 2011 that showed that, one of the most well-known applications of vitamin D supplementation, for instance, is for osteoporosis. And so they tested the osteoporotic women who were taking the vitamin D supplements with calcium, and they actually had an increased risk of heart disease. And so those studies are no longer ethical because of the increased risk of cardiovascular events. And so there was really a moment there where we realised that maybe vitamin D isn't the only picture with calcium, and if people are having increased heart attacks, and they weren't having increases in bone density, by the way, so we were giving them vitamin D and calcium supplements, they were having no increase in bone density, but they were having cardiovascular events. So it showed that there was some more to the picture here, and I think that really kind of gets to the root problem here, is that we're not understanding this system.
This is very typical of medicine. They want one magic thing to do a magic job. And I remember the study they used, 1,600 milligrams of calcium citrate. So they're using one form of calcium. It is well absorbed. It's certainly better than calcium carbonate. But it's one form of calcium. It's not the breadth of minerals that's found in bone. The other thing was that it was a very low amount of vitamin D that they gave. Calcium is sort of like, to me, it's a canary. This issue with vitamin D, with calcium, and cardiovascular disease, to me that raises a red flag with inflammation.
Absolutely. Using that term as a canary I think is excellent, because it really shows that, we've been trying, giving people calcium supplements. If you think about the body, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why not get their systems so they're using calcium in the appropriate way? And like you say, inflammation, underlying gut inflammation, underlying liver or kidney issues will mean that they won't absorb vitamin D in the first place. So why aren't our vitamin D levels high enough or getting to the blood levels that we need and being used by the body? But what are also the other levels, the other parts of this system that that distribute calcium alongside vitamin D, we haven't even considered them whatsoever.
I think one of the other issues, of course, is the sloth mentality. You take a tablet and you want it to do all the good. It's kind of like, giving an astronaut a calcium supplement and saying, there you go, your bones are going to be okay.
Yeah, this is it. It's probably the calcium, the way we approach calcium came from the rickets approach, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where kids weren't growing their femur bones, because of lack of vitamin D, and we simply, it was the cod liver approach that cured that epidemic, and we kind of just struck that off as vitamin D and calcium, and then the forward movement of osteoporosis was vitamin D was thought to be the only factor, but there's more to it.
So with regards to more to it, we've got another fat-soluble vitamin, which, of course, is really, one of the late-breaking heroes, and that's vitamin K. But then there's different forms.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of goes back to what Weston A. Price wrote about. He was kind of saying in the 30s, after we'd had this rickets epidemic, that, well, these traditional societies, they ate these diets rich in these three factors, and it was vitamins A and D, which he identified. He went back to his lab for years after traveling around the world. But then activator X, which he wrote about, he couldn't identify, and he died. His work was left as activator X, as these three factors that were, sometimes 10, 20 times richer in traditional diets than what his patients were eating back in Cleveland, Ohio. And, for 70 years, we didn't know what activator X was. And, that really was a huge misnomer, I think, as to why Price's work wasn't understood. It's because it wasn't until 2007 that Chris Masterjohn put it together and said, well, hang on. And they looked through some evidence going back through some Japanese studies, but also just some quite obscure physiology around vitamin K, and found that there's actually two of them. And that vitamin K1, the one that we know that is involved in blood clotting, is one molecule called the phylloquinones, but the menaquinones was actually the molecule that Price was talking about, and that was rich in these diets. And menaquinones have a completely different role to phylloquinones, and this is now we're getting into the what we're talking about in terms of calcium distribution, because they activate proteins in the body that carry calcium. It's one of the most obvious and yet misunderstood physiological processes, is that once vitamin D absorbs and gives us all the calcium that we need, vitamin K2 has to activate the proteins osteocalcin and matrix GLA protein to, one, take the calcium into bones, which is osteocalcin primarily, but matrix GLA protein needs to go around and pick up the calcium out of our soft tissues. So if we're throwing vitamin D and calcium into our patients, we're absorbing some calcium, but it's going into our vessels and soft tissues where it shouldn't be, and we're having cardiovascular events. Did
vitamin K2 become evident to us because of the work of Weston A. Price, and they were looking at this activating factor X?
Well, it's one of the most misunderstood vitamins, I think, we'll see in the 20th century, but I think ever. So we identified it in the 1920s and 30s. So it was identified as a chemical molecule, but it was so similar to the vitamin K1 that we put it into one category as vitamin K.
Yeah,
but they're two different. They're two different things. And then at Harvard in the 75, they picked up that osteocalcin was this protein that was vitamin K activated. And then in the 90s, we found MGP protein. So it was a very pieced puzzle along the way. And then they found that the MGP protein prevented arterial calcification. But we still didn't connect to that fact that there were two vitamin K molecules and that they did different things in the body. And so that wasn't until 2007. And it was kind of this huge culmination of looking at Price's work, but then all this vitamin K, very kind of in-depth chemical, it's a very specialized area of chemistry. So I think only a very small group of chemists really understood the molecule. And then putting that together with what Price saw, and to understand that K1 and K2 are very different.
When I did nursing, there was vitamin K. That's it. There was no K2. It was just vitamin K. That was its name, and that's all it's for, clotting, and that's what you use it for, and you give Kanakian to a baby when they're born. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, you'll get medical professionals that are not aware of vitamin K2, and they will automatically assume that vitamin K is one entity and it's for blood.
Exactly. And, the name K itself is, really flawed because, they really are two separate molecules. They behave very differently. They're related, but, we haven't been taught the physiology of K2. And it's all there in the literature. We know what it does in the body, but we simply have not been taught how it connects to one, bone mineralization and tooth mineralization, but also soft tissue, the prevention of soft tissue calcification.
Right. So do you find that it has a role in gingivitis as well, or is it mainly to do with just that remineralization of teeth?
Yeah, so it's got we could pretty much rename, if we're going to go and rename it, the dental vitamin, because it is just magic in the mouth. K2, when my patients start to eat K2, when they when we start to introduce it back, and there's actually something very interesting. There's an observation you see in dental patients that is one of the most cardinal signs that we're not getting enough K2 potentially, and that's actually calcification of dental plaque, so dental calculus. So people that get a big buildup on the back of their lower teeth, if you run your tongue along there, and that's the stuff you get cleaned off at your dental prophylaxis.
Yeah.
People have certain people have a very illogical buildup of this dental calculus, and it's caked on, and sometimes completely covering the tooth for 2, 3, 4, 5 centimeters. And there's no explanation in dental literature why some people would have a bigger buildup of this calcified plaque, besides the fact that they don't brush and floss. And, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I've seen patients who have very good oral hygiene but have this amazingly persistent and, large buildup of dental calculus. And it is a lack of vitamin K2. Their body can't place calcium into the bones.
You really did blow my mind with our last podcast. You were talking about things that I just thought weren't possible. And one of the things that you really woke up in me was the immune system of the teeth. So are you saying, therefore, that calcium is being the canary because it can't be placed to where it should be, and so it's settling out in places where it can't? Well, it's settling down as plaque because of an aberrant immune response or a problem with the microbiota of the oral cavity?
Well, there's a two-pronged front there, and this is really the kind of the central dogma of oral health, is that our bacteria in the mouth are the kind of the outside, the environmental dictators of the oral environment, and we have probiotic bugs in there that are protecting its species. So a diverse oral microbiome, just like a diverse gut microbiome, is what promotes oral health. That's part one. But part two is that the body and every tooth has its own immune system, and this immune system, so every tooth has a junction between the enamel, which is the hard outer coating, and the dentine, which is the inner coating. And the enamel is the mineralized; it doesn't have cells; it's not alive as such. But so what the dentine has is it has a blood supply and a nerve supply from the dental pulp, and there are actually cells called odontoblasts that sit down at that dentoenamel junction, and they're like kind of the SWAT police of the tooth. But the odontoblasts are run by vitamin A and D. So if you don't have enough vitamin D and A, you're not activating this osteoimmune system that is defending your teeth. And so odontoblasts will actually release the proteins, MGP protein and osteocalcin. And so if you don't have K2, they can't release the immune factors that protect against your tooth against any invading bacteria. So you have an inbuilt defense system in there, but that is run by vitamin A, D, and K2. So that's why people today have, we have rampant tooth decay, because we don't have that inner defense system. We've got an imbalanced oral microbiome, and then the whole thing's out of whack.
Do you have to have preformed retinol as in like topical exposure, or can it just be absorption from diet? A good dose of carrots, and if you're that way inclined, you can have some lamb's fry.
Well, no, exactly. You've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, so Price did find that preformed vitamin A, and we know that there are absorption issues with proformed vitamin A. Certain people don't convert it well, and so it seems that we do need a dietary source of preformed vitamin A, so it's being delivered to the teeth, and vitamin A plays a crucial role in things like jaw growth and clefts and facial growth as well. So it's all interconnected. So we know that vitamin A plays a role in cleft lips and palate, and there seems to be a role in these midline deficiencies with vitamin A, because our knowledge of the physiology of vitamin A isn't very detailed. There are many different vitamin A receptors. So how it works in the body and how it signals facial growth, we understand that it works in these processes, and we understand that, for instance, in clefts and cleft lips, vitamin A is a factor, but we don't go into much depth into, for instance, going further into understanding how it relates to, for instance, malocclusion, but also jaw growth as a whole.
Look, again, glad you mentioned it, because I constantly am dumbfounded by the paranoia about vitamin A. Yes, high doses of vitamin A are teratogenic and cause all sorts of issues. But there's an international vitamin A working group, an IVAG paper on vitamin A, and it states that 10,000 IU can be given at any stage of pregnancy, regardless of existing status of vitamin A. And indeed, I remember reading a paper of 15,000 IU was preventing facial cleft deformities. But there seems to be this area above where we don't know what happens. Then it becomes a problem. So what's your experience?
Well, I mean, so the thing is with vitamin A and A, D, and K2, they all work together. So that we create need in the body for vitamin A when we ingest vitamin D, and this was Price's entire theory and observational with what he looked at in terms of the dietary aspect of dental growth, was that these three vitamins work together. And if you look in terms of going back to our calcium distribution problem, you can probably see vitamin D as being kind of the materials truck pulling up to a house construction site, and then kind of vitamin A activates all the osteoclasts and the cells to turn over all the workers to bring the materials into the job. But then K2 activates, it's kind of the water into the cement mixer. So without K2, we don't activate the materials to actually put it into the house. But you need all three together, and they work in this beautiful synergy all over the body. Vitamin A and vitamin D they activate genes, both with the VDR receptor, but both interacting with each other as well. So vitamin D will activate a certain gene, but it will also depend on vitamin A as well.
And I've got to say, I wanted to do a call out before, because the brilliant work with regards to vitamin D from Professor Michael Hollick, elucidating its other actions in the body outside of bone.
Absolutely, and this is really what the last 10 years of, the last 2 decades really of research that has shown us is, we can link vitamin D deficiency to digestive issues, to immune issues, to metabolic issues, right through to the brain and our thumbs disease. And we're talking about these VDR receptors being on 2,000 to 3,000 genes. So there are genes sitting there and waiting for vitamin D, and yet some close to 75% of us are what we would classify insufficient. And it's just insane that we have not had this conversation in more depth.
Well, indeed, in Australia, there's still this pervasive attitude that anything above 50 is fine. Indeed, if you're at 50, you're fine. That's optimal, which is not. That's the lower limit of acceptability. And they're fine. There's people that, like, I think it's the Osteoporosis Society, finally sort of saying, no, look, we really should be looking at 75. But then there's other work. Indeed, Michael Hollick did work showing African tribesmen. They had levels of 220 nanomoles per litre.
The recommendations of vitamin D levels, when you really look at them, they don't have a lot of, there's not a lot of logic there. Like you say, that we're generally hovering around the 50 stage across the board now. But there's one Canadian study in 1,000 school kids, and they showed that the risk of tooth decay increased below 50, but there was also a relative risk between 50 and 75.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and that comes up also in studies like Alzheimer's as well, is that there is there is a relative risk as we decrease our levels, as the levels drop.
Yeah, so, MS.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a world map of multiple sclerosis, and the higher latitudes and the higher the risk of MS.
It's really that simple. I don't understand why this hasn't been better communicated. And for one, in the dental industry, I think dentists should be probably at the forefront of managing vitamin D because of what we know of what it does in the mouth. Yet it does not. It just has not propagated in how we practice, or even our understanding of what it does in the mouth.
I've got to say though, you really opened my eyes once again about stop using these things in isolation, because if we're just going to go, there we go, an intervention of, let's say, 4,000 IU of vitamin D, well, it might raise vitamin D, but does it change the outcome of disease? Maybe the issue is that you're being too simplistic and you're not giving, K or vitamin A with it, K2, I should say, or vitamin A with it as well.
Absolutely, and the fat-soluble system, really is a system in that, and we've really misunderstood. This goes right down to our measurement of blood cholesterol. Blood cholesterols are, our lipoproteins are what carry these vitamins around the body. And so, without, for instance, taking a vitamin D supplement with a fatty meal, and that's probably likely, even with the saturated fat, a decent percentage of saturated fat in that meal, we're unlikely to absorb this nutrient from the get-go. So, how we're recommending that these supplements are taken and what they're taken with, for instance, a vitamin D supplement should never be taken without a K2 supplement, full stop. But we don't get this message. And there are some brands out there now, they put it all together. They put D3, they'll put K2, magnesium and calcium. So it is getting there, but it's been a very, very slow message, and a lot of physicians aren't aware of this, and unfortunately a lot of dentists as well. But
of course we should always be favouring diet over supplements. So how do you access this with your patients about correcting the real problem, which is their dietary intake?
Absolutely, and that's always the baseline moving forward. That we have a system here that is waiting for this stuff. These are the most crucial nutrients, in my opinion. When you shape a diet around the fat-soluble vitamins, everything falls into place.
Right.
And if you kind of think of the physiology, it makes a lot of sense, because they're actually the hardest nutrients to get in the diet. And so traditional societies always treasured these foods that were rich in fat-soluble vitamins, because you have to treat them well or you don't get them. And we're talking things like, amazing grass-raised butter, things like organ meat, which, as you said, the lamb fryer, a slice of organ meat or dishes that contain organ meats have been treasured in every society around the world. But things like eggs, things like fermented foods such as Japanese natto, high in K2. These are cheeses and full-fat dairy. These are foods that have been treasured, for many, many thousands of years. And the reason is because if you don't treat them right, our modern dairy, for instance, would have very little vitamin K2 and likely vitamin D unless it's fortified, because our animals aren't, they're not receiving, for instance, the precursors of sunlight, preformed vitamin A and K1 through eating grass.
Okay, a couple of questions here. Firstly, it's been shown that the major impact of changing a vitamin D is really behavioural. We need to be eating lunch, or at least 5 minutes of lunch, outside and exposing the upper parts of our body, even if it's just the arms and, the top part of our chest, the neck area. People eat lunch indoors. That I think that's been shown pretty well. Notwithstanding that we do get vitamin D from food. Vitamin K, however, is very interesting. Now, I don't like liver. steak and kidney pie, I remember vomiting up into the bowl. So for those of us that don't like organ meats, where do we get vitamin K2?
So grass-fed butter, so dairy if you do tolerate dairy, if it's grass-raised, it will have K2 because the cows eat the grass which has K1 in it. Things like fermented foods will give the MK7 version of vitamin K2, so sauerkrauts, and they have to be fermented and quality. But Japanese natto is one of the richest sources of the MK7 vitamin K2. There are certain foods. Kefir is a great one as well. Eggs, so a few eggs a day, as long as the chickens are pastured and they've kind of been running around eating seeds and bugs. Yeah. So they have K2 as well.
You mentioned cheeses before. Is there any certain cheeses that are higher in K2?
Yeah. The brie and gouda are both rich in K2, and that's the MK7 form because it's a fermentation process. So there is a bacterial mode of K2 synthesis. You've got the MK4s, which are found in the animal products because they're converted from the K1, but the MK7s are actually bacterial derived. So you find these in cheeses, which is fermented. Gotcha. Your sauerkrauts, natto, for instance. And so it's a very small set of foods actually that have K2 in them. So it's really, really important that we focus on them. And that's what societies have always done. And when organ meats are actually, I get what you're saying there, and it was an adjustment for that. But there is a way to work it in. I mean, for instance, if creating mince with, just having a few slices of organ meat, you can hide it in a bolognese, for instance. I get my patients to do that, especially with kids as well. A slice of liver just has the full spectrum of these nutrients. And it is difficult to get. So, and we've just had these foods in our history for a very, very long time. So I think a slight readjustment in that sense is important. But there are other dietary sources as well.
I like the thought of hiding it. So what about things like vitamin A, of course? We talk about preformed vitamin A, and you get that in high amounts in liver. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. What about carrots? What about vegetable sources? Well,
vegetable sources have that proformed vitamins to the beta-carotene. So our body will convert a certain amount, but also there are certain people, depending on there are certain genes that will depend on how well we convert our beta-carotenes, whether we eat it with fat, so that the rest of your diet. So a higher fat diet is crucial for this as well, because these vitamins are fat soluble. So we need to be eating a lot of fats, and this includes the saturated fats, to what we would normally in our diet, in a modern Western diet, in order to absorb these properly. So there's studies that show that if you eat a salad with fat, you're going to absorb more of the beta-carotene. That's simply because of the fat-soluble nature of their molecules.
I was going to make another point, and that is for those listeners that might not be able to handle something like lamb's fry, the lamb liver, or steak and kidney pie, that sort of thing, then even things like chicken liver, like the pâtés, they're much more dietarily accepted in those for a lot more people. So even things like chicken liver can help with vitamin K and vitamin A.
Absolutely, yeah. Duck and goose liver pâtés are really high in K2, and you can kind of salt them and give them a bit of a taste. And kids tend to like them too, so that's one. Pâtés are good for kids as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely they also have the desiccated liver tablets, but I don't know. I just think that we should try and at least have one meal a week to get this. But the thing is too is that when you understand what it does in the body, and I'm not sure if you've tried a slice of grass-raised liver wrist, it's like a strong coffee. Like your body is really happy when you're eating this stuff, and you feel $1 million. Liver cooked in turmeric and a nice butter and coconut oil.
I really think I would have to cook it with some flavouring.
Yeah, well, like a bolognese in a mince, you could you would completely not notice it there.
Oh, well, look, these are the things that we need to do for our patients, and I think anything that we can do to increase them, great.
Yeah, we've really not had this conversation that these foods are important. So, that's the first step, is that we need to understand which of the foods and why we need them. So there's not a lot of this information out there, unfortunately, for our patients. And so I think that really is a big first step.
And these are covered in your book, The Dental Diet, yeah?
Exactly. So there's a 40-day meal plan in the dental diet to reintroduce these traditionally ancestral-based foods in a modern world, both for taste and also convenience.
When you reinstitute the intake of these vitamins in your diet, I would hope that you don't have to supplement, but maybe there's this short-term period where you might do an emergency sort of supplementation phase. Do you do that?
Yeah, generally with patients, I find that the dietary changes are certainly long-term, but for healing of certain conditions, the supplementation is needed. And things like cod liver oil tablets and also emu oil is a great source of AD and K2, one of the richest, actually. We're very lucky here in Australia. It's one of the richest sources of the MK4. So these they're dietary supplements. They are needed in certain situations, and because of all the physiological processes that happen to convert vitamin D, many people with digestive issues or metabolic issues or kidney or liver issues will take a long time for their levels to lift up, and we need to monitor, and they sometimes do need to supplement with higher doses. People with sleep apnea, for instance, have been shown to have low vitamin D, and it does take time to reestablish a good gut microbiome that can absorb it all and get things moving back.
And once people correct their intake and have adequate amounts of these vitamins, how quickly do you find a resolution or at least a mitigation of their conditions? I mean, sleep apnea is something very, very serious. I wouldn't be relying on just a little bit of supplementation to cure this. So what do you do?
No, absolutely. The dietary change is significant, and it is usually a significant lifestyle shift that we need to get people off harmful foods for one, the sugars, the flours, the vegetable oils. These are all things that are stopping us from absorbing these nutrients in the first place. But once we replace, and if we can get people eating a nutrient-dense and fat-soluble nutrient-dense diet, in kids especially, we see a rebound, nearly immediately. It's quite amazing that, their bodies just appreciate so much when they begin to eat foods that are actually giving them what they need to grow and develop. In people with sleep apnea, I've seen very, very good results. For instance, people with sleep apnea often have chronic gum issues because there's a breathing/inflammation thing going on in the body.
Yeah.
And these periodontal issues will not be resolved, just by scraping the teeth through periodontal, treatments and regimes. And so, so when we get the vitamin D levels up, when we change their diet, all of a sudden their inflammation levels in their mouth have resolved, and their sleep is starting to get better. And so they're on a track to getting better, and they're eating better, and they feel a lot better as well.
Now, you mentioned kids there. I have to ask, with regards to A, D, E and K, I'm thinking maybe particularly A, D and K, but what about growing pains?
Yeah, well, exactly. And there's a lot of things like, tooth eruption, thyroid issues, like you mentioned, hormonal issues. Vitamin D is completely fundamental in managing the hormonal systems in the body. So these are vitamins that kids drastically need. If you test kids, especially the kids that I've seen with dental disease, they are always at dangerous levels of vitamin D. So this goes across a full spectrum of conditions. And when we're talking about growth and development, they're absolutely fundamental.
We've got a scourge of obesity in the community, and particularly in our kids. 20% of our kids are overweight. I would imagine a rather big backlash from the orthodox sector of the community, of the medical community, saying, how could you recommend high-fat diet in kids that are overweight? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the problem with this is that the evidence heavily suggests that the simple refined carbohydrates in terms of sugar, and especially fructose that kids are consuming now, is driving the increase in obesity and also even type 2 diabetes in younger and younger people. So removing sugars is almost agreed across the board as being the approach to this. But one big problem, and I think we're kind of in a grey zone with dietary recommendations now, is that we don't know what to replace with. And we've now established, the whole saturated fat conversation. We've had that. We need to really, because these foods that we're talking about do contain high levels of saturated fat. But the evidence has shown that the reason why we were hiding from these foods in the first place, weren't grounded in good science in the first place. So the saturated fats don't cause obesity. They don't cause heart disease. We need to straight up say that. We need to have that conversation and turn this kind of dietary confusion that we've had around. And, the really kind of scary thing too is that when you kind of track what we did in terms of what Weston A. Price was writing about in the 30s and 40s, then what we did in the 60s and 70s in terms of removing these saturated fats. These are the foods that are rich in fat-soluble vitamins. We directly advised against them. And this is the reason why. So we've taken the exact opposite route of what we knew developed dental arches, and the result has been the type 2 diabetes epidemic, the obesity epidemic. We're now walking into behavioural epidemics and sleep apnea epidemics. And, so that we've got our answer. We've had an experiment on ourselves. It's time to turn that around.
Steven, and I think the way to turn around is certainly to start reading your book, and I'm going to, The Dental Diet, an exploration of evolutionary diet, genetics and nutritional medicine. Brilliant. I want one. Steven, I can't thank you enough for taking us through the dietary sources, the issues that can be corrected by concentrating on a fat-soluble diet and getting enough fat-soluble vitamins back into our diet. Can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for joining us on FX Medicine.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It's an absolute pleasure.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. This podcast was brought to you by The Dental Diet, the surprising link between your teeth, real food, and life-changing natural health, by Dr Steven Lin. It's available now, and for more information, go to drstevenlin.com.